Good evening and welcome to the 6th Annual Rosalie Rendu Forum. I want to welcome our distinguished guests, who I'll be introducing to you shortly. I want to welcome St Vincent de Paul board members, conference members, volunteers and staff, all of whom have contributed to the work of this evening. I want to welcome our supporters in the community, and I want to welcome members of the community who perhaps don't know a lot about St Vincent de Paul Society, but together with everybody in the room has a sense of urgency about the importance of tonight's topic. So welcome to everybody. My name's Susan Goldie and I am part of the executive team with St Vincent de Paul Society, and it is my pleasure to be hosting this wonderful event this evening. We variously call ourselves St Vincent de Paul Society of New South Wales, Vinnies, the Society. It's all one thing, but you might actually hear us referred to in a few different ways tonight, but we're all the one organisation, and certainly tonight we are all united in one purpose, which is to join in a call to action to walk out of here at the end of this evening and see what we can do better for people seeking protection in Australia. Part of my role this evening, of course, is to remind you of the safety procedures that we need to go through, so I might knock that one off first. If you do have a mobile phone, if you wouldn't mind please turning it to silent. Toilets, men's and women's, are out the door and right down the end of the building past the chapel, down to the right. In the event that we don't get to stay here and have refreshment because we do need to leave the building a little bit earlier, can I just draw your attention to the emergency exits? Within this room, that door, you'll go out there and you'll actually come back around behind the stage and you'll leave the building from over there. There's also an exit back the way you came, which is out the back of the room and straight through the building out to Pitt Street. And our emergency meeting rendezvous is up in Hyde Park over behind St James Station. Failing that excitement, there will be the pleasure and the excitement of refreshments after this evening's event, but I'm going to just keep you paying attention. I'm not going to tell you where the refreshments are going to be, just so I make sure I have your attention for the rest of the evening. What are we going to be doing tonight? We are going to be joining together in a common call to action. We are going to have the great privilege of listening to internationally renowned experts in the areas of refugees and asylum seekers, with an opportunity to understand government policy, to understand what is going wrong in our country in relation to our government, our political response to the needs of people seeking protection in Australia, and an opportunity to consider what each of us individually and collectively can do to change what is going on. This week is Anti-Poverty Week, and in the context of Anti-Poverty Week, I'm inviting us all to reflect on the particularly shocking disadvantage experienced by people seeking protection in Australia. We're going to hear from distinguished experts about the scale of that misery and disadvantage amongst people for whom human rights find limited expression in Australia at the moment. We are going to be confronted by the statistics and, importantly, by the stories of real people who live the distress and the disadvantage of government policy. And we will be challenged, hopefully, to take action as we leave the room tonight. Before we begin to focus on people who have newly come to our country and for whom we want to issue a warm welcome, I'd like to invite Donna Ingram to give us a welcome from those of us in this country of ours who have been here for the longest time. Donna Ingram, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to be here this evening to offer you welcome to country for the 6th annual Rosalie Rendu Forum with tonight's topic, People Seeking Asylum in our community. Thank you to St Vincent de Paul for giving me this opportunity to represent my community in this important cultural protocol. It shows respect for and recognition to the unique position of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australian culture and history. We are gathered on the traditional land of the Gadigal, who are one of 29 clans of the Eora Nation, which is bordered by the Hawkesbury, the Georges and the Nepean rivers. I'm an Aboriginal woman who proudly identifies with the Wiradjuri Nation through my family connections from a town called Cowra in central West New South Wales. I was born on Gadigal land and I've had the privilege to live, work and raise my 4 children on this land for most of my life. My family has grown to include my granddaughter Aaliyah, who is the joy of my life, along with my grandson Elijah, who is almost 7 months old in 2 days. I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal, their spirits and ancestors who will always remain with the land, Mother Earth, and thank them for their ongoing custodianship and for allowing us to gather on their land this evening for this important discussion. I pay my respects to our elders, both past and present. We must never forget the sacrifices made by our leaders to create a better future for Aboriginal people. I do this as a reminder and as a tribute to elders and those who have gone before us to fight for land rights, justice and equity for our communities. I extend my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from all clans and nations who are present this evening. I also recognise our non-Aboriginal sisters and brothers who walk beside us to assist and care for all those in need with compassion and respect. I now offer you a warm and sincere welcome to the land of the Gadigal of the Eora Nation. Wish you a safe stay on the land and safe travel from the land. On behalf of my community and the Gadigal, I wish you a great evening at this forum, named in honour of an inspiring woman, Rosalie Rendu, who became known as Good Mother of All. I'm sure you'll enjoy hearing from an empowering and knowledgeable panel who will discuss the issues affecting people seeking asylum or protection in Australia. In closing, we remember that this is, was and always will be Aboriginal land, but we don't mind sharing. Thank you very much.
Donna, thank you, and may I also add my acknowledgement to traditional owners, past and present, of the land on which we are meeting tonight. Thank you very much, Donna. Rosalie Rendu Forum, thank you for mentioning that. Sister Rosalie Rendu is a very important part of the heritage of the Society, St Vincent de Paul Society in New South Wales, and we're going to share a little bit of her story now. I'd like to invite Anne Stanfield to come up and share this. Anne is one of the board members of the St Vincent de Paul Society in New South Wales, and I have to add, a very close colleague of mine. I have the great pleasure of working with Anne also in her role as the president of the Parramatta Central Council. And thank you.
Okay, good evening everyone. This forum is named to honour Blessed Rosalie Rendu, a daughter of charity who worked among the poor in the streets of Paris in the very turbulent times during and after the French Revolution. Her example has inspired countless people in the over 200 years since her birth. As a young girl, Jean-Marie Rendu felt called to serve God and the poor. Inspired by their service to those in need, she entered the Daughters of Charity, taking the name Rosalie. She was a mentor and inspiration to Frederick Ozanam, a university student who, with his companions, founded the St Vincent de Paul Society. Frederick sought advice of Sister Rosalie, who was already visiting poor families in one of the most impoverished districts of Paris. She introduced Frederick and his companions to people they could assist and played an integral part in the birth of the society. She showed them how to be with people in need. Rosalie taught the energetic and idealistic students how to serve the poor with an attitude of respect and genuine love. She modelled how to foster relationships that enhanced their service. From Rosalie, they learned the value of pooling resources and skills of strengthening church presence and providing mutual support as a way of being effective voices for the voiceless, to be advocates for social change. It is often said that Sister Rosalie Rendu was one of the Society's co-founders. She exerted such a significant influence in shaping the mission of the newly formed Society. Sister Rosalie had little formal education, but with her energy, creativity and courage, she established a network of Daughter of Charity charitable services around the world, dedicating her life to addressing the causes of poverty as well as serving people in need. She opened a free clinic, a pharmacy, a school, an orphanage, a childcare centre, a home for the elderly, and youth activities for young people. She became, as Donna said, the good mother of all. As well as assisting the poor in the streets and in their homes, Sister Rosalie showed great courage and leadership during the bloody uprisings that took place in France between 1830 and 1848. During the battle, she would climb up onto the barricades, risking her life to help wounded soldiers, regardless of which side they were fighting on. Sister Rosalie expressed that there are many ways of providing charity. The assistance of money or the assistance in kind that we give to the poor will not last long. We must aspire to be more complete and give a long-lasting benefit, study people's abilities and try to get them to work out of their difficulties. For Rosalie, charity was rooted in love but very practical. She sought ways to provide more than a handout and continued to inspire us in the Society to innovatively find a hand up. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Anne. We're now moving to the heart of this evening's event, which is our keynote address entitled People Seeking Asylum in Our Community from a Human Rights Perspective. Following our keynote, we will be having a panel conversation with a wonderful array of speakers. But before that, it is my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Emeritus Professor Gillian Triggs, who is very well known as the President of the Australian Human Rights Commission between 2012 and 2017. Gillian has combined an academic and a writing career with an international commercial legal practice as a barrister, working with governments and international organisations advising on human rights law. In Australia, Gillian has focused on the implementation in Australia of human rights treaties to which Australia is a signatory, and also on working with nations in the Asia-Pacific region on practical approaches to human rights. Gillian has been the Australian representative on the Council of Jurists for the Australia-Pacific Forum for National Human Rights Institutions, Chair of the Board of the Australian International Health Institute, a member of the Attorney General's International Legal Service Advisory Council, and Chair of the Australian Law Deans. Gillian also served the Human Rights Commission recently as Acting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commission for some months early into this year. Just last week, Gillian was appointed as the inaugural patron of the Refugee Advice and Casework Service, which is a partner to the Society and about which we will hear some more. Gillian, could I welcome you to the stage?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Susan, very much indeed for that introduction, and thank you, Auntie Donna, as she leaves. Thank you very much. I'm glad you're sharing it with us. It's very kind of you. You didn't have to do that, actually, in all the circumstances, but great. And I love to hear these introductions and welcomes because it does remind us about our forebears, about the rich culture that we have in this remarkable country, and I'm always so pleased to share the platform with Auntie Donna. She's always a delight to work with. So I too acknowledge the traditional owners, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and respect their elders, especially if they're here with us this evening. Well, I am very a privilege to have been invited to speak to you this evening. It's wonderful to be here at the Wesley Mission, here in the heart of Sydney, which has played such an historical role in raising social justice issues at a very practical level in Sydney over many, many years. So I was delighted not only to be here this evening, but also to learn a little about this wonderful woman, Rosalie Rendu, from Paris. As a child, I was educated at Catholic convents in London, and I'm well aware of the remarkable strength and courage that our nuns display. They were, of course, in the 40s and 50s when I was first at school in London. The nuns at that time were, in fact, among the best educated of women at that period. They were pretty tough cookies, I can tell you. But I learned to deeply respect them and to understand their stories and the principles that directed their lives. But I do wonder sometimes if I owe my own determination to speak out about social injustice to those wonderful nuns. Just a word or two about Rosalie Rendu. She was remarkable, and I think one of the things that she learned very early in the Jura Mountains in France was that her family offered refuge to the priests during the French Revolution. And she then, of course, became a daughter of charity and worked in the Mouffetard district of Paris for 54 years. But what I find interesting is that she became the superior of her community and used that position of relative power to be able to develop her work for the elderly and for the young and for the poor. And it does make the point for me that it helps to be in a leadership position of authority or power, because you've then got a platform from which to speak about the issues of social justice. And she used that to great effect. She got the Légion d'honneur from Napoleon III, and when she died in 1856, I gather there was a huge outpouring of people onto the streets to recognise this remarkable woman. So I'm very pleased that she is somebody that the people of St Vincent de Paul honour, and in this now the 6th annual lecture. Well, I was pleased, of course, to be invited to speak about this topic of Australia's immigration laws and policies, a topic that's not really generally understood, but which brings a lingering misery and despair to thousands of asylum seekers and refugees living in the Australian community, and it will continue to do so for many years to come. The recent emphasis of the political debate, and indeed of my work as President of the Australian Human Rights Commission, and in that of the media, has been on the indefinite mandatory detention without charge or trial of those seeking our protection as refugees, held on Manus Island, on Nauru, on Christmas Island that I visited 3 times, and the mainland detention centres. But while these issues are of course important, and it's vital that these people seeking our protection are brought to Australia and treated with the respect to which they're entitled. But we have, I think, failed to notice the plight of some 20 to 30,000 asylum seekers, refugees and holders of temporary protection visas and bridging visas who remain among the most vulnerable and impoverished in our society, right next door to us. They are part of our community, but there appears to be no durable settlement as a prospect for them. They've become socially isolated. They've been marginalised and demonised. They're often unemployed. They have poor English. They have fears for their families. They have significant cultural differences, sometimes mental and physical problems, and a profound loss of status and social standing. They've been demeaned by the government regularly and consistently as illegal and as queue jumpers. And I was really shocked to see the other day the Minister for Immigration describing those refugees who've been accepted mercifully by the United States. Despite the President being very unhappy with the deal, they have been good to their word. They have taken a group, and I hope many more. But for our Minister to describe them as economic migrants, when by definition, by legal definition and recognition by the United States, rigorous process, they are refugees entitled to dignity and respect. And I think we, and others of my colleagues who are here tonight and will be speaking in the panel, we've all watched this over many, many years. And sometimes it's the spitefulness that is so worrying. The law, well, lawyers get used to that. But the spitefulness of it, on Christmas Island, women standing in the sun waiting to get more nappies for their children because they've run out of the 3 for the day. or the refusal to let them to take food to someone who was sick in one of these desperately overheated cabins. And the stories are legion. But my emphasis today is on the subject that you've chosen, which is very important and that we've, I think, not fully understood. And we will start to understand this as the years go by, because these people aren't going anywhere. They are part of our community, and it's time we understood that. The state and federal governments, in my view, have largely abandoned their responsibilities and duty of care to these people, who now depend for protection, support, legal advice and access to medical care and education on the ad hoc goodwill of countless community and charitable groups throughout the country. St Vincent de Paul Society in New South Wales is one of the many faith-based institutions I've come to know in my job, or former job, and we take perhaps that role for granted. But of course, they're the ones that pick up the tragic consequences of the policies of respective governments with respect to those categorised as unauthorised maritime arrivals. Vinnies has, I know, assisted families with accommodation through the Emily housing programme and assists with the funding, as has been mentioned by Susan, of the Refugee Advice and Casework Services that provides those critical legal pro bono advice for free judicial review of decisions where there's been an error of law by a judge. I was very pleased, of course, to read Pope Francis's message on the World Day for Migrants and Refugees. Referring to Leviticus, he said, "You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." And he urges us, and I think he succinctly sums up the law, the morality, the religious perspective, and the ethics in saying we have an obligation to welcome, to protect, to promote, and to integrate displaced people, migrants, refugees, and of course the victims of trafficking. Well, let me begin with a few facts. Firstly, those in immigration detention in Australia remain of profound concern. Yonge Hill. How many people here tonight know where Yonge Hill is? 1, 2 people. It's extraordinary. Yonge Hill is 2 hours' drive out of Perth. It's a high security detention centre, and there were, when I last visited it about 3 months ago, 300 or so men held in that detention centre, and they are completely unknown, unthought about, or uncared for, and they are in detention without charge or trial for years. On average, about 3 to 4 years, but I met men who'd been held in immigration detention, including in that facility, for 7 years. And nobody knows they exist, or hardly any people know they exist. But we also have desperately sad people held in Villawood, an hour's drive out of Sydney. We hardly know that they are there. And in the maximum security centre at Villawood, there are men being held 6 to a small room in bunks. And the truth is, we think of them as New Zealanders, the truth is they're South Pacific Islanders. They're big men, and they're having to live in these conditions without any hope of resettlement or of any kind of legal support. There are men and women in Mitre. I met a woman who'd been there for 7 years, without charge or without trial, with no hope of being released, no idea what was happening. The numbers are rising on Christmas Island. The numbers now in Manus are slightly reducing, but no solution after the 31st of October. The numbers in Nauru have been static for a long time, with close to 200 children still on that island with their families, and rising numbers of people being detained now, and again, little discussed, where visas have been cancelled on character grounds prior to deportation and subject to review by the courts. But as I've said, in the community, there are tens of thousands who live with instability and uncertainty. They will never be allowed to settle permanently in Australia according to government policy, and their children will not be eligible for citizenship. They're sinking into poverty, homelessness and despair for their futures. Some of them, particularly the young men, although I shouldn't generalise, who commit criminal offences, often quite minor, when they're immediately rearrested and taken back to detention centres, again, without charge or trial. Well, what is the legal position at the moment? Those seeking asylum receive 89% of the very small New Start allowance. This allowance is removed if they receive a second negative merits review decision by the Immigration Authority assessment on their refugee status. For most of them, they have not had their refugee status yet assessed because of a freeze on the assessment process by the government. The bar, as they choose to call it, has been lifted and applications have now been made with the help of RACs and others. But the tragedy has been that people have been here in some cases for years without any effort whatever to assess their claim to refugee status. Now that's not a minor matter, because when you've lost everything, when you're denied the one aspect of status that would give you dignity and a position and rights under the Refugee Convention, you are denied that and left to remain as an asylum seeker and demeaned, as they so often are in the media, by our leaders. Some people have had their work rights removed and their Medicare restrictions are limited. Asylum seeker children are at school where additional resources are necessary to support them to provide counselling. Even New South Wales, as I understand, removed access to the public transport cards. For the group brought to Australia for medical reasons, known as Regional Processing Centre clients, the government has now issued a final departure bridging e-visa under which the $200 a fortnight ended on the 28th of August, a few weeks ago, and the removal from government-supported accommodation. What is to happen to these people? And the ministers had a deadline of the 1st of October for making applications for refugee status, and we know that once they are assessed as refugees, they're likely to be between 80 and 85% as recognised refugees. By refusing to assess their refugee status, we're really denying them the status to an overwhelming majority of those people who've sought our support. Well, what's the human rights law got to say about this? Well, the law is so crystal clear, and it begins, if I may say so, with that marvellous, feisty, clever, brilliant and strong man, Dr. H.V. Evatt, that many of you in this room will remember. He was invited by Eleanor Roosevelt to go to Washington to help draft the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And he was insistent on many of the provisions. One of them was Article 14, and that is the right to seek and enjoy asylum. And he, for those times, remarkably, was the President of the General Assembly, remarkable at that time because we were a fledgling nation. There he was as President, and I'm reliably informed that it was his sheer force of personality that made sure that that Universal Declaration was passed without a single negative vote. Can you imagine that in our modern day political environment? We have a lot to be grateful for from that man, but that was then developed, of course, some years later by the Refugee Convention provisions, which I won't go into in any particular detail, but non-discrimination for race, religion, and country of origin. There is a right to national treatment with regard to freedom of religion, access to work, and to professional, liberal professions and recognition of those professions in the country. A right of free access to the courts, to welfare payments, to housing and education. Critically, under the Refugee Convention, Article 31, there should be no penalty for anybody who arrives without a visa. Under Article 32, the refugee may not be expelled and, in particular, may not be returned to the place where they were discriminated against. And in Article 34, an obligation to expedite their naturalisation and assimilation into the community. Well, the policies that I've just been describing are designed for an entirely different purpose. They are, I now believe it to be true, it's a strong statement, but I believe the policies are designed to break these people, to break their spirits, and to encourage them, regardless of their status, to go back to the one country that they've got a legal right to go back to, which is the country where they're most likely to have been persecuted. And I think it's scandalous that even Rohingya refugees, who are stateless virtually by definition, are being offered significant financial payments, reportedly $25,000, whether that's entirely true, I'm not sure, but offered money to go back to Myanmar in a context in which nearly 500,000 have fled for their lives, and we're now seeing on the television every night more and more graphic pictures of the conditions of these people. This is a serious regional matter, and it's time the government stood up to challenge these policies that are causing such utter misery. Well, other legal conventions, and I don't need to labour this point, but is of course the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Anti-Discrimination Conventions on Race, Sex and Disability. But here we come to the aspect of my work that has been rather frustrating, and that is that these human rights, which were developed by Australia with great enthusiasm and engagement from the time of Doc Evatt through the 50s, 60s, 70s, right up to the creation, in my view, of the International Criminal Court in the 1990s. Australia was a leading country, negotiating, drafting and persuading. But unfortunately, and one can almost date it from this time, although it's always difficult to do it historically, but from that extraordinary year, 2001, we saw a complete change in approach. In that year, you'll remember, we had the Children Overboard lie, which was demonstrably a lie, but too late to do anything about it by the Senate. The Tampa sailed in with the humanity of that remarkable ship's captain into the territorial waters of Victoria. And a few weeks later, the terrorist attack, the tragedy of that terrorist attack on the Pentagon and the Twin Towers. But that really led to a complete change in approach and attitude, and led, in brief, to the politics of fear. And that has conflated in the public mind a fear of unlawful entries into Australia, a fear of terrorism, and indeed now even a fear of those who profess the Islamic religion. So we have to stand up in our communities against that trend since the year 2001. I think the last 15, 16, 17 years we've seen a decline of all of the principles that were so important to the leaders of Australia in those earlier decades. But what is very difficult is that, and I know this is a legal point, so hang on to your seats a bit, those major treaties that I've been talking about are not directly part of Australian law. That is, Parliament has not given effect to them in our domestic laws. So that when I speak to the Minister or through our lawyers to the Federal or High Court and say, holding a person indefinitely without charge or trial is contrary to Article 9 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, I'm quite correctly told that's not directly applicable law in Australia because Parliament has never passed enabling legislation. We have done in relation to race and sex, and ultimately, although we were the precursor actually on the Disability Convention, but we've been very, very slow to implement the international treaties that we were so enthusiastic about into our domestic law. And that tragically has been a phenomenon with the Refugees Convention, where most of the relevant provisions have been stripped out of the Migration Act. And now the definition of a refugee is up to the minister. And there's huge level of ministerial discretion. So one of the great difficulties has been trying to speak about human rights when many of those provisions are not actually directly applicable law. And that is, I think, explains some of the problems. I'd like to finish, if I may, by just saying a little bit about the work of the Refugee Advice and Casework Service that St Vincent's supports. It's been remarkable. They're the ones behind the scenes, quietly, pro bono lawyers, providing legal advice for so many people who needed to make applications for refugee status. Now, I've been estimating, and I don't know the exact numbers, but somewhere between 20 and 25,000 people claims of refugee status has not yet been assessed. But RACs were able to meet the deadline for 1,783 of them, helping to fill out these extraordinary forms for people for whom English is not their first language. They've met clients. They've, in some instances, I'm told, 24 hours before the deadline imposed by the minister, and they had only 60 days, I think, to do a full application. So this was an extraordinary thing to do in terms of natural justice. But nonetheless, we'll put that to one side for the moment. The RAC staff became aware that a few people had not put in their applications, and they went out at the weekend to find them in their suburban areas and to sit down with them on the kitchen table and fill out the forms and get those applications in, which they've done. So I'm very, very proud indeed of the work of RACS, but I know that the work that they're doing and those pro bono lawyers is replicated in communities all over Australia, and I'm very proud of that. But I do feel it's shameful that that responsibility has been shirked by our own government. And even though it looked as though they were going to win that case, claiming a breach of duty of care by Australia to the Manus Island detainees, the government did what, of course, it was entitled to do. It settled the matter for $70 million at the door of the court. But what that means is we don't have legal jurisprudence to go to the court again on other cases. It's just been avoided. And that's, unfortunately, the environment in which we live. Well, one of the purposes I know of today is to talk about advocacy. And I think that is really absolutely vital now. We have to stand up against alternative facts, false news, post-truth. There's no such thing as an alternative fact. I don't even believe in balance. There's truth. Now, unless you're that marvellous man who does the Brian Cox, unless you're in another universe, there is an element of objective truth when you're working at the level that many of you are working. You're on the street with people who are poor, they're homeless, their rights have been denied. That's not a relative position. It's a pretty bad position. And I think we need to speak up about the truth. And we have to do so with our evidence. We have to do so in a measured, non-confrontational way. But we have to keep doing it. And I strongly support those within St Vincent de Paul, those at the Wesley Mission, those thousands upon thousands of people that I see across Australia. We need to stand up to speak, and I like the suggestions made. Write to your Member of Parliament. It does work. They will go to Canberra and shake these letters in front of the Minister and say, this is what the community is saying. And I see them everywhere, in the streets out here, in Pitt Street, on the tram, in the supermarkets, people stopping me saying, you know, I'm a National Party voter or a Liberal Party, I don't care who you vote for, but they say, I know that this treatment is wrong. At a humane level, this treatment is wrong. So decent Australians, and most are, whatever their politics, find these policies unacceptable. And I think we've got to, those who can, stand up and speak up about what we know to be the truth and we know to be the most humane policy. We need to get our younger people involved. We need to get a greater diversity. We need to engage with our political leaders. And we do need strong leadership. And that's why, if I may, let's finish by remembering that very strong personal leadership of Sister Rosalie Rendu. A marvellous model for us all, and I think it's something we could all reflect upon as we gather the strength to speak up as clearly as we can about the unacceptable nature, legally, morally, and in religious terms, absolutely unacceptable behaviour to people who have simply sought our protection. Thank you very much.
Gillian, you've really thrown the gauntlet down. We've got our work cut out for us, and that's why we're here tonight. There was something you said a number of times during that wonderful presentation, and it was, you hardly know they're there. We hardly see them. You hardly notice them. At Vinnies, we talk about raising our voice. And Gillian, you have challenged us to do exactly that, and that is the purpose of tonight. We are raising our voices loud and clear, and there will be more later in this evening about exactly how we're going to be doing that. But we're going to hear from four wonderful voices now. I'm going to invite our panellists up to join us and to comment and to take Gillian's comments further. I need to say I'm no Jenny Brocky and I'm obviously no Tony Jones, but we're going to see how we go with a conversation. And if there is any time, we will take a question or two from the floor. But it is my great pleasure to ask our panellists to join us. I'm going to ask them to come and sit, and then I'm going to introduce them all together, because if I went through their full bios, we would be here for the rest of the night. They are such remarkable women. Carolina, Sister Carmel, Jennifer, Mary, do you mind taking your seats? And what I'd like to do is briefly introduce each of them to you and then ask you to give them a warm welcome round of applause. And then we're going to get stuck into some questions, just like they do on the telly. First of all, I would like to find my notes. First, that's what I'd like to do first of all. And I'd like to firstly introduce Carolina Gottardo. Carolina is a lawyer and an economist who has worked on human rights issues for more than 20 years in different countries and contexts. Carolina's areas of specialisation are gender, asylum and migration. Carolina is the Director of Jesuit Refugee Services Australia and previously has been a Director of a women's rights organisation working with refugee and migrant women in Australia, in the UK for a number of years. Carolina has also worked for the British Institute of Human Rights, the British Red Cross, and the Catholic Agency for Overseas Development in the UK, and the Constitutional Court and the United Nations Development Program in her native country of Colombia. Carolina has also served on a number of boards of organisations related to human rights, migration and refugee issues. And Carolina is currently a member of the Executive Committee of the End Child Detention Coalition in Australia. Next on our wonderful panel we have Professor Mary Crock. And Mary has built a highly regarded national reputation in the area of immigration and refugee law for over a number of years. She is the Professor of Public Law at the Faculty of Law, Sydney University, and has been the Chief Examiner and Assessor in various specialist accreditation programs in international law across Australia for a number of years. She was the Foundation Editor for the Immigration Review Journal. Mary has published extensively on issues relating to immigration and refugee law, and her work, also on unaccompanied children, saw her shortlisted for the Australian Human Rights Commission's Human Rights Medal in 2012. Mary's education and advocacy work has been widely recognised, including recent awards such as the inaugural Medal for the National Ethnic Disability Alliance, and in 2016, most recently, a recognition with the Affinity Intercultural Foundation Award for contribution to social justice and human rights. To Mary's left is Sister Carmel Hansen, who is a member of the Congregation of the Sisters of St Joseph at Lochinvar, up in the Hunter Valley. Sister Carmel established and coordinates the House of Hospitality, which is a project of the Sisters offering safe, supportive, drug-free accommodation to over 1,000 men, women and children. Has a particular focus on supporting asylum seekers who are studying in the community. Sister Carmel has been awarded the Humanitarian Overseas Service Medal for her education and her work in East Timor, and she's also been a coordinator of the Sanctuary Movement, a movement by the Catholic Sisters of Australia to offer sanctuary to East Timorese people under government threat of being sent back to East Timor. Sister Carmel works closely with, as a wonderful volunteer with the Society, and works as a volunteer solicitor and psychologist in an outreach role with the Society, and she's been recognised and awarded, including an Order of Australia, for service to social welfare, particularly through the provision of care and support for disadvantaged groups. And I need to add, Sister Carmel surfs. Don't know when, but apparently she does. To Carmel's left, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Koji, originally from Ghana, West Africa, and a former refugee. Jennifer arrived in Australia in 2011 and studied at Maryland's Secondary College and finished a Certificate 3 in Healthcare Services in Nursing. And Jennifer is currently working as a childcare educator. Jennifer recently completed the Red Cross 20-year Youth Leadership Program. And through this program, Jennifer's developed an interest in the humanitarian sector, in our sector, and is hoping to go on to further study in international studies and public policy. Could I ask you please to put your hands together and welcome our panellists. Thank you. Now, I'll get the mic up. Excuse me. How's that? Can you still hear me? Yep. Fantastic. So, Carolina, I'd like to start with you, if I may. We've heard from Gillian about the critical importance of a human rights frame of reference when we're considering the rights of people seeking asylum in our country, and you are a passionate advocate for human rights and their power. My question for you is this: how do you see a human rights agenda as a tool to support people seeking asylum when they're enduring the privations of extreme poverty in our community, when our government abandons them?
Thanks, Susan, and thank you so much to Vinnies. I'm so pleased to be here today. In terms of how do I see human rights, I want to say that I think that human rights is really, or really the erosion of human rights, better, is at the center of the situation faced by men, women and children seeking asylum in Australia. And I want to use some examples of our work at Jesuit Refugee Service, and also that it is part of the work that Vinnies does with people seeking asylum in the community and some other wonderful organizations in our sector to establish that link with human rights. So elaborating a little bit on what was Gillian's fantastic presentation before. So if we look at a number of situations, Gillian already mentioned the legacy caseload, or the people that arrived by boat in between 2012 and 2014, and the fact that they were simply not allowed to apply for asylum for a number of years. And suddenly the government came out of the blue with a deadline of 1st of October that they imposed on them. And if we consider the implications in terms of human rights of such a measure, we're talking really about, firstly, access, due process. And due process is a human right. And we're also looking at access to justice. But if you think also of family reunion and the right to a family and private life, that's also implied, because these people have not been able to be reunited with their families for a number of years, and won't be in the near future because the processing is going to take a long time. And there are deadlines for them, but of course there is no deadlines for the immigration department. Then if you take, on the other hand, the example of, very recent example that Gillian also mentioned and that we are working with right now, at charities, Vinnies, Asylum Seeker Centre and other organizations, of the people seeking asylum that in the vast majority are refugees, and they were coming from Nauru and Manus, came to Australia for medical reasons, and again out of the blue the government stopped support and accommodation. And if we look at the implications in terms of human rights, we're talking about destitution, poverty, deprivation. So we're talking about economic and social rights, and people being treated without any dignity and respect that they deserve. Again, the right to access health, because many of them their transfer was delayed by the Australian government, so by the time they came here, it was quite late for them, and some of them have chronic conditions as a result of that, so they were not able to access health services, plus the fact that they have been detained mandatorily and indefinitely, breaching the right to liberty, for a number of years, and with all the consequences in terms of health, mental health, etc. that leaves. So, again, this is a full human rights picture. And it is right now organizations such as Vinnies or GRS or asylum seeker centers and others, the ones that are providing the support to these people when the government has an obligation. It is the government that detained them, the one that should be providing for them and the one that should be respecting their rights. And the same applies to all the asylum seekers in the community and in terms of access to employment, access to housing, and the whole issue of homelessness, which is also a human rights issue, access to healthcare, etc. So, as you can see when talking about people seeking asylum in our community and human rights, these are two things that are very, very closely linked. So how we can use human rights as a tool. And obviously there is the problem of enforcement that Gillian mentioned before. So human rights is a beautiful framework, but the problem is how to enforce it. And what I believe is that it needs to be done in an integral and kind of holistic manner. In the sense that, for instance, that asylum seekers and people seeking asylum themselves should know about their rights and should be empowered to be able to exercise them. But at the same time, there should be awareness raising with services to ensure that people seeking asylum can access services, for instance, at the state level. And at the state level, there have been some success in New South Wales and in Victoria, for instance. So that's another part of it. But also, there should be a holistic approach in terms of advocacy and campaigning targeted at the government so that it's accountable for the human rights obligations. And that includes also litigation, strategic litigation, to try to make sure that those obligations are enforced whenever possible. The other thing is that in terms of international organizations and national organizations and the roles of rapporteurs, such as the rapporteur on migration or the rapporteur on torture, and all of that, I think that's very important because right now Australia has a seat at the Human Rights Council, which is almost unbelievable considering the whole issue of, it's a scandal, and in the world it is perceived as a scandal, the situation of Australia, because it not only has an impact on the people seeking asylum here, the human rights issues of Australia have actually been used as a model for other countries in terms of deterrence and punishment and criminalization of migration and asylum. So I think Australia sitting at the council gives us a platform for asking for that accountability or for trying to exercise that accountability. And it means that we need to call the government. We need to use this opportunity to call the government into account. We need to do more shadow reporting. And just to finish, I just want to highlight something that both Gillian and Susan said before, and is that we all need to be part of this. I don't think we can afford to stay silent. I mean, it's such a scandalous thing. And so many people are suffering up to an incredible point, and it's such a lack of dignity and respect for other human beings that we just can't afford to simply witness. We need to do something, and I like to use the parallel of, okay, we have a bipartisan policy that means that the turning back of the votes and offshore processing is not likely to end because the government doesn't want it to end. But does that mean that in the past, because we could not achieve to end the slavery or to ensure that women have voting rights, we just give up because it's not achievable? I think it's the opposite. I think it's right now is the time for action, and I just want to join that call of action to ensure that every single person joins that and is ready to fight for the rights of probably the most vulnerable people in Australia in our current times, and whose rights are being seriously breached.
Thank you. So we have this wonderful framework of human rights, but it's not working. There are shocking barriers which our government is perpetuating. How do we connect people seeking asylum with the rights that are available to them? And Mary, that is my question for you. You are one of our leading exponents of promoting and making accessible legal rights to people seeking asylum. Talk to us about the barriers and how we join those dots.
Well, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land. I always begin any speech with that because it's well to remember that most of us here are migrants. You go back, we have, I think it's 27% of Australians now were born overseas. If you go to their parents or their grandparents, we very quickly find that we have more migrants in Australia today than at any time in our history as a nation called Australia. Look, I think Carolina just gave us the most wonderful summary of the human rights framework and where we're going wrong. I guess the point I would like to make first is that, in fact, we have a manageable number of people that we are treating very badly. Now, for me, that's a positive because we can do it. It's actually not beyond us. We have had much greater numbers than the numbers that we have now. And I think it behoves us to realise that, yes, these people are being treated appallingly. We are spending huge amounts of money. We've actually spent on the offshore processing of less than 3,000 people, $9.6 billion. More than the United Nations has to spend on 56 million refugees and persons of concern. So we are a global embarrassment at the moment. And yes, we have literally just been elected to the Human Rights Council. As we speak, as we gather tonight, we are being reviewed by the Human Rights Committee as well, under the ICCPR. And so this afternoon I was fielding, as probably you were as well, various calls to say, you know, tweet this, tweet that. You can actually live stream it right now if you've got your mobile phones. So yeah, a lot of what we're doing is hugely embarrassing. And how have we been able to afford $9.6 billion? Well, we've stripped out our foreign aid budget, haven't we? So we're not only spending these just obscene amounts of money, but we've done it by taking away the money that we should be spending to develop and assist people around the world. But look, 20,000 people, we can do this. It's actually totally doable. The other news is that we have introduced these ridiculous fast-track systems, and we're now hearing, I'm actually, a bit like Gillian, a dirty hands academic in the sense that we're both practitioners as well as teachers and advocates. I have always called Gillian my sensei. She's been an inspiration. It's the Japanese word, inspiration, in so many levels in my life. But like Gillian, I've kept my practicing certificate. So I've had clients going through this fast track. I have a client who's been refused. And so I've actually been through this ridiculous paper appeal process that they have. So the news is the process is bad. We have a constitutionally guaranteed right to judicial review. People are starting to appeal to the courts and seek judicial review. It's going to take us a long time to do it. But look, if you look at this strategically and historically, most people who seek asylum in another country actually end up staying in that country. And Australia, that is true for two reasons. First of all, most people who come by boat, historically, we know are convention refugees. And however long it takes, eventually they will be found to be refugees. And for those who are rejected, very often we can't send them home anyway. Iran won't take back a person who does not want to go back voluntarily. The Palestinians, stateless, no country will take them. So we're likely to end up with these people anyway. What can we do about it is the question. Carolina has told us that international human rights gives us the framework to tell us what we should be doing. I find great encouragement talking to a room of people like you, and in fact being on a panel such as I'm on with people who are doing it. That's what we've got to do. Just make like the shoes. Get to know these people. find out what their human capital is. What are their skills? One of the best things about Rosalie Rendu, I think, is that she understood that human rights is not about helping people across the road even if they don't want to go. It's actually about recognising people's humanity and their capacity. And that's where I am throwing my future emphasis in my research and in my work. I've just come off doing a 6-country study of people with disabilities in a variety of scenarios. We went locally to Indonesia and Malaysia, and then to Pakistan and Uganda. And then we did a study of a hot refugee situation in Jordan and Turkey, looking at the Syrian refugees coming off the border. Got myself into some really sticky situations. But at the end of the day, that research is about recognising that everybody seeking asylum is human and needs to be seen first and foremost as a human being with capacities and needs. And we can't help people until we know more about that. What we found, for example, in this research with disabilities, that you'd ask people, have you got a disability? And for a whole range of reasons, they'd say, no, nothing to see here. But when we turned it round and we started asking functionality questions, even the United Nations, when we started this work, said, it's very sad, people with disabilities, they don't travel. You know, they stay behind, they die in greater numbers than anyone else, but they don't travel. They do. They travel and they are present in refugee populations at a, not surprisingly to me, at a greater incidence than in the ordinary population. But we found that out by asking questions like, do you have trouble seeing? Do you have glasses? Do you have what you need? Do you need a hearing aid? Do you have a hearing aid? How do you go lifting, a bottle of water or caring for yourself? How well are you sleeping? Can you think straight? Now, do you think these questions are important to know if you are involved in the process of working out whether someone is or is not a refugee? Well, rather. But we seem to be sleepwalking at the moment in our country. We don't know the people who are out there. I've got a couple of grants in and I'm hoping to do some more research here, having done it overseas as well as going back overseas. So, I think we are in a unique position here where you have an organisation that allows you to go out. You want to do it carefully, by the way, because a lot of these people are very, very damaged. Go in with your eyes open, with assistance and with professionals. Reach out to people. Live with them if you can, but that's not for everybody. But there's a huge amount of human capital out there, I think, is the take-home message, and it's up to us to really unlock that, because if we don't, we're losing people, we're losing that human capital, but we're also, as you all know already, we're damaging ourselves as a country.
Mary's just asked the next question, Sister Carmel.
Thank you. Can you hear that? When Pope Francis went to Lampedusa in 2014 and he stood by that sea and he thought about the hundreds and hundreds of men, women and children who drowned trying to come to a better life, he made 2 statements that I'd like to share with you tonight, and I think they're very challenging and they pick up on what the other speakers have said. One of the things he said was, when we look at the media reports, and God help us, the Rohingyas, as Gillian said, I mean, every night on our television, those terrible stories and the faces of desperation. And I always think of the men carrying the little children and the looks on their face that they just want to get them to safety at any cost. And the mothers, God help us, delivering babies on the terrible flight. And Pope Francis said, have we become victims to global indifference? Do we see so much? Do we hear so much? And we're not out there on the streets waving our placards and beating down the doors of our politicians. We didn't swim out and get on board the Tampa. You know, we didn't bang on Howard's door about the obvious lies. But then he said something else, and it sat with me, and he said, have we forgotten how to weep? And my people, I think that is the basic question. Do I weep when I see those television programs? Do I weep when I read the statements of so many of the people who went through racks? Do I weep? Have I forgotten how to weep? Because I think when we begin to weep, then we take action. I have the privilege of living at the moment with asylum seekers. We forget, or we don't know, that's better. We don't know what it means for young men and women to leave their families and their countries and come here, leaving sometimes as young as 16. And I just want to make a couple of points about that. The loneliness. Many of the asylum seekers that I've met, and indeed with whom I live, are not lonely really for their families, because many haven't seen their families for years and years as they went from country to country and eventually ended up in Indonesia waiting again to jump on a boat to come across here. They're lonely because they can't make friends, because they look different, their English isn't very good. And the young people I have with me, these asylum seekers, are going to the Newcastle University and doing an open foundation course because it's a good opportunity. And people, for all the good reasons in the world, encourage asylum seekers, you know, to do things. And sometimes they see it as a golden opportunity. And one of my young men finished his first semester in Open Foundation, and he said to me, all I could do in the exam was write my name at the top of the paper. But it's a good opportunity. Now, I know he's going to fail this semester, but I agree, we've got to sort of be where they are and try and find out how best to move people into society. I don't know what to do about the loneliness, and I think a lot of it is related to cultural nuances. The young Kurdish woman I've got was sitting on the steps crying in the first semester, and I said, oh, what's the matter? She said, no one will be my friend. And I spoke to a few people who've worked in different countries, and they said, you know, how does she interact? And, you know, she's a lovely woman, and she's obsessed with study because some person who really wanted to help her told her that if you go to the Immigration Tribunal and you tell them that you're getting 9 out of 10 for all your subjects, you won't have any problem. And I'll come back to that in just a minute. Now, her way of doing things is different to us. Like, she comes home and I say to her, how did you go in your exam this week? And she goes, well, 9 out of 10. What would you expect? Well, can you imagine how that would go down with other Australian students? I mean, most of us would go, oh, I got there, you know, and you'd be a bit embarrassed about the fact that you got 9 out of 10. Little things like that, you see, that's so hard for people to pick up. Now, that young woman became so obsessed with her study, she wasn't even eating. And she went for her interview 1 month ago, and she was rejected. And one of the reasons she was rejected because she was the fact that she was doing so well at university. And how could she be doing so well at university if she's supposed to be a Kurdish, uneducated woman from a village? Thank God she's appealing. And I think too, with the young men that I live with, it's that whole cultural thing of the male having a certain role in their culture. They come here and suddenly it's almost reversed. And these young men, even living with me, a Holy Catholic sister, you know, when I go down to the kitchen and I see the mess and I start ranting and raving and saying, you know, put your things away and, you know, there's a kind of a, hey, hang on, you know, you're a woman. They're learning. They've learned very fast, actually. But, you know, I mean, we laugh, but, you know, it's hard for them. And as one of the young men said to me the other day, look, I want a woman. You don't understand. Well, I don't. But, you know, like he says, you know, he says, in my country now, I would have a wife. Yeah. He's only 20. Yeah, I'd have a wife. And, you know, and what he was really trying to say was she'd keep me in line because of his post-traumatic stress, every time he gets money, he gets drunk. But, you know, he wouldn't be doing that if he was home and he had a wife and, you know, he was in his community. And they struggle. And, you know, I know we've got starts and we've got counselling and we have so many other people who work with them. This young man has 5 workers. But when he doesn't want to see them, he's not home. He won't go to starts. He's not there when they come to take him for a counselling session. And what do? You just have to hang in there and walk with them. But look, can I just say, and, you know, you were saying, Mary, about, you know, walking slowly with them and journeying with them and you know, trying in many ways to be hospitable and everything else, but please don't give them false legal advice. Please don't tell them things that aren't true. Because when that young woman came back from the immigration detention centre, she lay on a bed and she sobbed and she kept saying to me, but Carmel, I got 9 out of 10 in everything, every week. That's cruel. So a realistic future, and thank God we've got a partnership with RACS, and I worked with RACS for 2 years. It's wonderful that we have stepped forward, we've been sentients, and can say, you will live with dignity. The government can persecute you and try and force you to go back to danger, but we will stand with you and we will allow you to live with dignity. So let's do that.
It's easy to feel a bit overwhelmed. Firstly, by the astonishing achievements of these advocates for the rights of people seeking protection in our country, and secondly, by the challenges. However, when I spoke with Jennifer during the week and listened to what you, Jennifer, saw as the way to overcome some of these barriers, I was absolutely inspired. And I wonder whether you'd share your view about that from your perspective.
Thank you very much. Well, speaking in terms of being a young person, I believe creating a lot of employment opportunities for, you know, refugees and asylum seekers will help in the way we actually support each other financially. I think most jobs these days require the first-hand experience. And what do you expect from people who don't have experience in, you know, in the fields that you're expecting them to be in? And I feel like creating an apprenticeship program and traineeship workshop and everything will help in, you know, granting them that support in being able to find that employment easier. And then again, I feel really passionate about educational opportunities because I feel like being educated these days gives younger people the voice to speak. It actually helps other people, our older generation, listen to our ideas and take our opinions into consideration. Being educated these days also gives us a broad understanding of what goes around in our world, of the issues and concerns that happen in our world, and what we are able to identify, and then how to resolve those problems, and therefore implementing changes in being able to help support refugees and asylum seekers. So I'm granting access to, you know, universities and TAFE, and I think the government has started doing that with the Smart and Skilled Scholarship Program that is going on. And I feel like I think universities has HECS fee help, and creating other fee help opportunities and programs for refugees and asylum seekers is going to be a great opportunity for children, for young people to be able to achieve their dreams and also to benefit the country more and more. In this way, we are killing two birds with one stone, actually helping people achieve their goals and aspiration and having a greater economy in Australia. Also, I agree with what Sister Carmel said about the loneliness. I really do not agree with the detention centers, because I feel like, coming in to a place where you feel more secure and then you feel hope and then you don't get it and then you just feel lonely and without any personal relationship, it's not a great thing for people from asylum, seeking asylum in Australia, because we are all coming from, a place where fear and chaos surrounds us, and we expect to come to a place to have, hope, to have safety. And when we don't have that, it isn't great, and we don't feel welcome, we don't feel accepted, and we are individuals in our own way. We have different characteristics, so we can't be put in, a certain kind of group just because this group does that or that, but we are our own persons. So what we have can portray the individualism in us. Thank you.
There'll be an opportunity for you to talk with these wonderful women after we're finished here, when we're sharing a drink and a bite to eat. But thank you all so much. If I could ask you, if you wouldn't mind taking your seats again. Yeah, hang on to your mics. And another round of applause. Thank you very much. Wow. What a wonderful, wonderful series of insights into everything from the international human rights context within which government policy in Australia needs to change, through to the intimate and the personal realities of people seeking asylum in Australia and experiencing terrible, unnecessary, cruel barriers to existing rights and future hope. St Vincent de Paul Society works every day to tackle those issues and walks side by side people, as Sister Carmel mentioned. To give us a bit of a sense of what that journey looks like and of the programs which we support and undertake, I'd like to invite up to the podium Dennis Walsh, who is the President of the St Vincent de Paul Society in New South Wales. Thank you, Dennis.
I'll cut some of this out so you can see space on it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Susan. Before I start, I'd just like to say it was magnificent sitting through that panel, and you heard the stories, but this is not a G-up, it's not a laugh, but if you've got an iPhone at the moment, this afternoon on Channel 9 News, the Australian Government Immigration Department announced that they're introducing a new system, and that is that if you're an asylum seeker in Australia, you must apply in writing to the Immigration Department and the Australian Government to get written permission to keep a pet. That's the latest news story, just come through this afternoon, the last couple of hours. So it sort of dovetails into some of the hoops and so forth that we've been hearing about on the panel. So it's quite obvious that many of us come from all sorts of political backgrounds, don't we, Peter? But it's quite obvious that this stuff is about making people jump through hoops. Look, we're going to have some time to talk afterwards, and Susan will need to be able to wrap up as far as the what to do, the action plans we wish to follow. So I'll try to be a little bit brief. So I'll just acknowledge the original inhabitants of this land before I start, and I'll just take us through what Susan has mentioned, is that we have a number of programs operating here in New South Wales which support asylum seekers and refugees. Now, the Society, of course, throughout Australia, and particularly here in New South Wales, always works towards the compassionate relief of anybody in any set of circumstances, and that is most certainly true, that we want to get far more involved in assisting the asylum seekers that are currently living in Australia at the moment without assistance. So I did have a few stories here about what we do at the moment individually, but I think I'll just cut straight to the actual programs that we have, then Susan can talk about what we're going to do in the future in more detail. So the support services we currently have is the Asylum Seeker Program, which is called ASP, provides financial assistance, case management and wraparound support to people seeking protection that are living in the community in New South Wales and experiencing financial hardship. This program supports vulnerable people and individuals and families who may be at risk of homelessness as they have no income and have minimal support options available to them. As we've already heard, we also partner with Refugee Advice and Casework Services, known as RACS, to support people who arrive in New South Wales after fleeing persecution overseas and do not currently have access to the assistance they need to resolve their immigration status. Under this joint initiative, lawyers from RACS Justice for Refugees program will provide judicial review referral assistance to people who have had a negative immigration assessment authority decision, even that's a long thing to say, isn't it? Or a Department of Immigration decision refusing to grant them a temporary, and again, when you read all this stuff, you think, you know, like it's to grant a temporary protection visa or a safe haven enterprise visa, who makes these things up, and excluding them from review in the Immigration Assessment Authority. These people will also need assistance by ASP to make sure they can meet their daily needs and live in dignity until the immigration status is resolved, because in many cases they have no financial income at all. They don't get much from Centrelink, if any at all, and they're turned loose in the community. It's a fascinating business plan that the government has. Unfortunately, it's involving people's lives. And the other thing I want to mention is Spark, which is a skill-based program we operate, but Spark is a settlement support program for newly arrived migrant, refugee and asylum seekers. So it's not just for refugees and asylum, but migrant children as well, seeking, and Spark partners with primary schools here in New South Wales and uses volunteers and other community organisations to support the settlement of newly arrived families and creates opportunities to engage with local communities. Each of these services displays our commitment to people seeking protection and is grounded in our values and Catholic social teaching principles. We believe in solidarity and in the value of working for the common good. We all have an obligation to promote the rights of all human beings across our communities and the wider nations, irrespective of borders. The common good is reached when we work together to improve the well-being of people in our society and the wider world. The society in Australia, particularly here in New South Wales, has become significantly large. We have a good supporting asset backbone to our organisation now. And alone in New South Wales, we have 251 centres. That's the Vinnies shops that you see. So it's a very large functioning organisation. And we want to, and one of our great works, of course, has been assisting of homelessness and so forth, and we're going to certainly continue that. But we want to bring those resources that we have now in a much more meaningful way to assist asylum seekers and refugees here in New South Wales who basically don't get any support from the government. And that's what we're trying to focus on tonight. But Susan, you will now come up and take us through how we might be able to do that. So once again, thank you for the panel. It was absolutely fantastic.
Dennis, thank you. And now we do get to the pointy end of the business. What are we going to do as a society? What are we going to do? And by that I mean the St Vincent de Paul Society. What are we going to do as a community? And what are we going to do one by one when we walk out of here? Apart from have a drink and a conversation with somebody wonderful in this room about what we can do together. Gillian, I said before that you threw down the gauntlet during your speech. Carolina, you pointed out that we now are holding ourselves internationally as having human rights credentials And really what we need to do as a society is take up the challenge of saying we must be responsible where government is failing to promote, to advocate, to raise our voices on behalf of people seeking asylum, seeking protection in this country, because governments must change and must do things differently. And that precisely is our call to action this evening. Tonight, the Society launches our new campaign called Standing with People Seeking Protection. We stand beside people seeking protection, we walk with them, and importantly, we are the stewards of their stories. We've heard tonight about the silence, the invisibility. Our job at the Society and as a community is to shout out those stories and share them. So our campaign launch tonight is about standing with people seeking protection and doing just that. We are calling upon the federal government tonight to show compassion and to uphold the human rights of all those who seek protection in this country. And I want to invite... On behalf of the Society, on behalf of the St Vincent de Paul Society in New South Wales, I want to invite everybody in this room to join our campaign, because it is time to remind our government and our community that we're not talking about politics, we are talking about people. And you've heard the stories, you have seen the faces. We're talking about men, women, boys and girls who are simply trying to find a safe, welcoming place to rebuild lives shattered by violence and fear, which should remain offshore and not be part of their community or ours. So, what are we asking you to do? You might have actually been sitting on it, but now's the time to just check. On everybody's chair is one of these cards. And on the back is a call to action, and we're going to ask you please to pull out your pen and to think about whether you can commit to one of these calls to action tonight. And then the price of a drink, the price of some nice finger food, is to share that commitment so somebody else in the room can hold you to account. There are 3 actions we're going to ask you to consider. You can stand with people seeking asylum and share their stories. Wave the flag. You've got a sticker on your chair as well. We'd ask you if you'd consider taking some posters out loud and proud. You can share stories. We've heard tonight about stories, moving stories. We've heard tonight about the barriers to getting these stories out into our community and heard by our governments in a way that changes policy. Think about who you might share a story with this week, a story even of your participation in this event tonight. And finally, consider picking up a pen and writing to your Member of Parliament. Gillian mentioned it before. Raise your voice. You can download a template letter. The information is on this card. Ask the government to immediately bring people held on Manus Island and Nauru back to Australia and to grant permanent protection to those people who are found to be refugees. So, apart from committing to have a good conversation when you leave this room with somebody else, please do think about what you can do tomorrow, next week, on an ongoing basis until our government changes its policy and until we can hold our heads high and say that we honour all the rights of people who seek protection in our community. Refreshments are straight out that door, I promised I'd tell you. And can I say it's been an absolute privilege to be with our wonderful guests, Carolina, Gillian, Mary, Jennifer, Carmel. I'd like you to put your hands together and thank them. I'd like to thank everybody who has made the effort to come out tonight, old friends and new, and please do stay and join the conversation out in the foyer this evening. And it's been a pleasure to be your host for the evening. Thank you so much.